I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange.
Hello, spooky nerds, and welcome to Talking Strange, a paranormal pop culture show with the Den of Geek Network, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. I'm your host, journalist, author, researcher of weird things, Aaron Sagers. You can also catch me as host of the Netflix series 28 Days Haunted and on the Travel Channel and Discovery Plus show Paranormal Caught on Camera. And for those of you that are watching this live via video streams, remember, you can slide in there and ask some questions, and we'll try to get to those as well. And we do have some people popping in there, and hello to Jess and Sandra who are here. And let me just say that I'm coming off of a couple of weeks of events of being on the road, from Waverly Hills Sanatorium with the Strange Escapes event, with Amy Bruni from Kindred Spirits. And then last week I was at Parapsychon at Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio. That was pretty great. And then a few weeks prior to that, I was at the Galactic Star Cruiser with Disney, which sadly is now closing. So lots of travel and a lot of opportunity to meet with fellow weirdos out there. And what I love about this job is, really getting a chance to speak to people that have all different types of backgrounds and interests and personalities, and also the ability to navigate TV and media. And a lot of that involves public relations. And that's kind of my awkward segue into bringing in this guest, because she is not only a personality and a person that's out there sharing her own ideas, she's also someone that's operating behind the scenes as a PR professional, managing like both public facing and also facing the media. So Chrissy Newton is the founder and owner of Vocab Communications, and she's an award-winning public relations professional. She's the co-host of Alt Pop Repeat podcast, where she kind of syncs counterculture and subculture with pop culture trends and movements. Also the host of Rebelliously Curious on the Debrief YouTube channel, where she covers everything from space and tech to defense and UFOs, and an occasional co-host on Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague, who's been on our show. So let's go ahead and bring her in. Chrissy, thank you for joining me. Hey,
Aaron. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So we could dive right in. I mean, actually, first off, how have you been? You're a busy woman. You cover a lot of ground.
I'm a busy woman. I don't have kids, so I always say that I can do a lot of different things. 'Cause I know when people have children, it takes over your life. Right now, I don't have kids in my life, so my podcasts and my projects are my babies.
Right.
So,
Well,
so that's why I do. Yeah, and I watch a lot of TV, but only specific to what I do. So, try to balance out your time.
Well, likewise, I don't have children. Instead, I have a dog and podcasts and multiple projects that I work on. So yeah, those end up being the children in my life.
Right. And they grow up to be wonderful things and share knowledge, and they contribute to society in some way as well. So
well, I know we've spoken before on here when there was congressional UAP reports, and then aside from that, it seems like it's a funny relationship I have with you, because I'll chat with you about stuff on this side of things, hosting and you being a personality, but also arranging conversations with your various clients. So before we get into how you're balancing all that, I am curious about your early days, your initial baby Chrissy's interest in all of this weirdness and where it came from to become part of your career.
I should actually grab this photo. You can see it. There we go. You can like zoom in. I think I was, what year? It was 97 here. So I'm wearing like an alien t-shirt. I haven't shown this photo fully yet because I was going to post it as a joke, because it's true and it's funny. But I've been into UFOs since I was like 6 years old because of my dad. My dad had an amazing experience with a group of people up north in Canada, and he had a UFO sighting. And the condensed version of it is that they got out of the car, they followed this UFO, and they flashed their lights at it, and the UFO flashed back at them. So they had some form of communication. And then after, my dad said he took out like a rifle. They weren't, I believe the guys might have been hunting, but my dad wasn't. But they took out this rifle. I don't know if it was my father or his friends, but they used the scope to take a better look at it. And then once they put the scope at it, the UFO knew that it was a threat, and it took off down the highway. And so there was a whole bunch of media reports of like UFO sightings that day before, and I believe the next day. So who knows what it is? My dad said the craft was really small, which is interesting to comparison. I'm not saying it's a Bob Lazar thing, but Bob Lazar's craft around the same time was pretty small as well. And I believe this was late 70s, early 80s when this happened. So what happened was my dad took a photo of it. He showed me that photo when I was a little girl. And I just remember it like lit up everything inside of me. And I was like, what is this? And then I was just instantly curious. And then my dad forever loved UFOs. So we would talk about it. He would teach me about stuff. We'd watch it on TV. I'd freak out and get scared as a kid at night. And then I just became part of it. Like I just started to research it on my own. And then I really took about like 10 years ago, I was like, you know what? I'm really going to embed myself into this counterculture because I loved it. And I went to my first UFO conference, was the UFO Congress, Alejandro Rojas. And I remember seeing him and seeing everybody else. And I was just like, this is where I'm supposed to be. I feel really comfortable here. And I love the topic and I love the community. And that's kind of how it started. And then it just kind of started to do its own magic, I guess, as I started to get older and also within my career in public relations.
How old are you in that photo that you held up?
I think it's 97, so I'm gonna tell my age now.
Oh,
I'm 38. Or sorry, 39. Geez. So I might have been like, what was 97? Let's do that. I'm horrible at math. I'm like, somebody tell us in the chat when that was.
well, it was.
I think I was in grade 7 or grade 8. Like
Yeah.
I remember because this is like an elementary school photo. This is not a high school photo. So like I was like super small when I was really into it, but I laugh because I'm like actually wearing like an alien shirt on it. So people will say that have known me because I usually get online, you get trolls that are like, "Oh, you're just like in it because it's cool." And it's like, "No, dude, this is my proof." I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm legitly a UFO fan and just the topic in general. So yeah, so and I funny because I haven't shown you, and it's actually in my office with a photo, and it's kind of like a reminder of myself of like, this is little Chrissy being proud of little Chrissy.
Yeah. No, it is funny when you think about where you've come from. And I do sometimes talk to my friends from my past and I say, like, was I always a weirdo? I feel like I always was, but it's also easy to do kind of some historic revisionism, but I like to kind of just double check. I'm like, oh no, I was always into this weird stuff. What about the kids at your school? When younger Chrissy shows up wearing her alien t-shirt and whatnot, were you talking about it openly, and what was the reception?
Yeah, I was fine when I was a little girl. If anything, my dad, like Candace, a friend of mine, came over, and I think this was more in high school though, like probably grade 9, came over to sleep over, and my dad started talking about UFOs, and she went home that night and like slept beside her parents because my dad scared the crap out of her. Because like a little kid doesn't have a paradigm shift, and for me, I was so used to talking about it that it just, it didn't phase me when my dad chats about it. So everyone kind of laughed, like they knew, they accepted it, and I wasn't like per se a weirdo. I've just or considered that, which is kind of funny. Maybe because I could actually, maybe I think around this time I could buy shirts that had like
Yeah.
aliens and UFOs on it, obviously. So there was like a cool factor to it too. Maybe, or I just found it and liked it. I wish I still had it, to be honest. But no one ever really bugged me. And it's funny, my entire life, I've never really been ridiculed or made fun of because I like UFOs, which I think is interesting. Even in relationships, if anything, I've got my ex-boyfriend into UFOs. He was buying like alien vodka and all this stuff after. And then when we broke up, he had like a newfound love. So, I've been lucky because I know a lot of people have a lot of issues with their partners or other people not accepting them.
Yeah, and I use the term weirdo, and I embrace it. I think
Yeah.
it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I refer to my fellow weirdos out there. Now you're talking about 26 years ago when that photo was taken. was, so think about the time of X-Files. Did it carry over into the pop culture interest, or was it just really focusing on actual cases?
It was a mix of everything. Pop culture, 100%. I've always been following pop culture my entire life. My other podcast with my friend is about how counterculture and alternative cultures become mainstream pop culture. So, like, for example, how us weirdos might influence the mainstream and then we're not so weird as people would think. We're maybe just early adopters. So, yeah, from X-Files to documentaries, a lot of documentaries and a lot of TV shows. And then just stories too. My dad would always kind of collect stories. People would come and talk to him within the local area because he liked UFOs. He was never like fully public about it, like screaming, I like UFOs. But if people knew, they would come and talk to him about
Yeah.
experiences or and whatnot. And my dad would be open to it. To this day, he's like, Chrissy, I don't want to do anything on camera. I was like, one day, Dad. But but maybe with me, but any other way, he's not that type of person. He doesn't want popularity. If anything, he was made fun of when he was younger. So he was more ridiculed, but it's totally different now. And it's switched for us. As I've been older now, I've been educating him on modern events and been meeting people and exchanging stories. And my dad, like every time I do something, he goes like, wow. Like it's
Yeah.
this. I'm like, Dad, I'm gonna go to this. He's like, wow. So it's cute. It's nice
Yeah.
to see too.
No,
Yeah.
that's really cool. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more about the podcast, the various shows that you do. First
Yeah.
off, what does it mean to be rebelliously curious? Because I know that's the show that you're doing on the Debrief YouTube channel, and then also it's embedded through the Debrief site. So, what does it mean to be rebelliously curious?
No one's ever asked me that, which is kind of funny. So I appreciate that. It's funny you think they would too. I think rebelliously curious can mean many things, but for us, it's people going beyond the limits of like science or even just the average society norm and asking questions and taking chances. And that's how I see it for my show. With Rebelliously Curious, I want people to feel like I'm actually asking the questions they want to know, especially in the UFO space, because we follow it so closely. And then I have a little bit of a broader conversation with people, let's say from NASA or different people that are forming new technologies or futurism. So it's about learning and educating and having fun with like my guests, but also then with the people that are watching to feel like they're kind of in the know as well of what's going on. Because you can't find a lot of content like that. You can only find it through podcasts or not through mainstream. If anything, it's through creator content. So that's for mine is being rebelliously curious, kind of pushing the limits at times but asking questions where people feel disarmed and comfortable to have those conversations with me, especially when it's UAP related. I did one with Danny Sheehan, last week. I believe it was last Friday, right? I released the podcast and it did fairly well and people loved it. And they were like, thank you. We want more and more of this content. And it makes me so happy to see that because I'm asking questions and digging a little bit deeper to get answers to stuff that people might want to know. And for example, it was about legislation. It's not easy to understand legislation. Gosh, when I was even breaking it down, I had to call different people that understand legislation so they could really narrow it down for me. And then we talked about where they saw loopholes. So when I had the chance to talk to Danny, I already had conversations with multiple people about it. But he's so good at what he does, and he's working with so many whistleblowers, influencers, so many whistleblowers, totally different. So many whistleblowers that he was able to give us a perspective from his work in UAP. Lobbying, let's say, and activism to, where we're looking now in legislation and how we can make it better and move forward and how people can ask proper questions to know what the government is putting forward in front of them, right? I think it's really
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
And well, just hello to some of the folks that have joined us. Chad, I see you, Chad. Chad's had his experiences, which he's shared before. He's got some great ones. And then Brandy and Sandra. Hello, guys. We've got a lot of people coming from all over the world. So yeah, I'm when you think about being a media professional and talking about any topic, but especially this topic, if you go on a cable TV network or even a local news channel, you're getting just a number of seconds to talk about this stuff, and you're having to talk in a manner that's very soundbitey, and it's
Yeah.
hard to really discuss nuance and discuss large topics and really get into it. Do you think that that's part of the reason that it seems like UAP podcasts are doing so well right now is because this allows people to kind of dig in deeper with the topics?
100%. News media only covers it from a surface level. Unfortunately, we need an outlet, if it's not multiple podcasts or a network, that focuses specifically on the topic, where it talks about news, programming. There's enough content that you can dig deeper and ask questions. So I agree. Yeah. A 5-second soundbite or a 15-second doesn't do enough, unfortunately, to really dig in. And there's so much history, right? Like it's
Mhm.
so rich. So you could have one thing that's happening now in Congress, but we could cherry pick it into what happened years ago within Congress. So what we're seeing right now is the past is reflecting in the future is different from where we ended in the past. And
Mhm.
that's where we're at. And there's enough content and there's enough people, I think, around the world that will watch it. I think it's a YouTube play. I really do. Or because of all the global conversation, I feel that there should be a larger YouTube network or show within the space that people can access for free and then sponsor content. But maybe one day all of us will get together and make a mecca of a network. That would be wonderful. But we'll
Yeah,
see. And I think hopefully it's moving that way and mainstream's watching what everybody's doing because people want it. They want the content.
I think they do. And I also think that that kind of plays into the other side of what you're doing as the founder and owner of Vocab Communications and doing this public relations work. I'm curious about the origins of Vocab and really the mission that you have with it.
Yeah, I started Vocab 14 years ago. So I was, again, like dating myself. I was 25 when I started the company. I got out of school and actually I built my logo in the computer lab on a long weekend break because I was so passionate and wanted to do something that was entrepreneurial. I didn't want to not say work for the man, but I didn't want to work for a corporate company internally. I had bad experiences before. I just didn't like the corporate politics. I don't play that way. I want to play fair. So that was the real reason why I started Vocab, is because I wanted to play in my own sandbox and I wanted to be able to work with multiple different clients. So as I was growing the company, I obviously liked UFOs and I would go to conferences or I was talking to people behind the scenes, mainly in Canada, not so much in the States at that point. Like I would go to meetups with Victor Vigiani, for example. We'd go for dinner, an amazing Canadian ufologist that worked with Paul Hellard. I would go to Paul's talks. I would talk to people. But at that point, Victor would say to me, Chrissy, you do PR. Like, we need somebody. We need someone like you to come in and help. And I would say to him, I want to, but I don't want to get blacklisted. I said, I can't. It's like way before 2017 in the New York Times story, going viral. And I said, I can't. I'm like, if I do, I will get blacklisted. No one's going to take me seriously and I'll lose my company that I've been building, like my adult, my adult life. So I said, I want to. But at one point when that story hit in the New York Times, I was in Mexico on a vacation and Victor Vigiani sent me a note and he was like, Chrissy, have you seen the paper? And I said, yeah, I have. I'm watching this on my phone right now in Mexico. And I'm like, this is unbelievable. I'm like, it's actually happening. Like we're getting mainstream coverage like we've never before outside of tabloids and, the general pickup that you get. So I was like freaking. And at that point I realized, going into those first kind of beats of my life where I was like, I can actually do this now. So that's where I started to move forward and wanted to obviously do a podcast that came out of a different direction, but the worlds kind of collided together at one point and I was like, wow, this is the time for me to actually do this and try to step forward and contribute. Not so much, I think everybody can contribute in some way to this topic because that's what it's about. It's a global topic. But I was like, hey, without me doing just a podcast, I can contribute and hopefully make some change in the media landscape. And we have a little bit. I work with Jacques Vallée, and we've seen that now we're going back that they're going to be, researching Trinity, which they would never have done before. So they're looking into that, along with then just, having people within the Pentagon read our stuff, and being able to have people make conversations and help push towards changes in legislation. So not saying that all comes from me, but a little part of that working together as a group and a facet and people that are really doing amazing research, I can help shed light on that. And to me, I feel that that's my best place outside of podcasting.
Yeah. And just a brief note, I think you're having some audio issues
Oh,
coming through. I'm getting some static. So if you want to check on that,
Yep.
what I'm going to do real quick is just read one of the comments that's coming in. And we have Chad here saying that I've been ridiculed my whole life for my experiences. Even today, my dad was afraid to share in the 90s because we owned a business, but most found it funny and they were the butt of jokes. It used to bother me up until about 5 years ago. And now I don't care. I just want to get my story out there, whether people believe it or not. It's becoming mainstream and common every day. So I certainly think that, yeah, having the conversations about it openly adds to removing some of that stigma. But from your perspective, when you're placing your clients for interviews and you're handling some of their work, are you still seeing? I mean, it goes back to when I first started as a media professional, that if there was going to be someone on camera talking about UFOs, it was going to be the X-Files theme song that accompanied them. Is that something you're still seeing, or is it overall, aside from the big New York Times articles that come out, maybe once or twice a year, is it overall mainstream, the stigma being destigmatized?
I think it's getting better. We're seeing, I'll say news segments, for example, local news segments still kind of do the kitschy UFO X-Files music still. I've seen that. And they're like, hey, Steve's out doing the weather and this morning caught a UFO. And then, and then they overlay the music and everyone's like, wow. And it's one of those morning show pieces that's so campy. So I've seen that a couple times and I laugh and I just shake my head and I'm like, we're still there? I'm like, come on, guys, come on, local TV news. But outside of that, no, I actually think it's getting better. Because how are you going to make fun of something when the government, well, I guess you still can, but when the government's taking it seriously, it's a serious topic, and you're getting major publications like the Wall Street Journal, you're getting the Washington Post, you're getting the New York Times. It's not as much laughable as it was, and you can still poke fun out of it. I think that, every topic you can to a degree of satire, but yeah, I don't think it's as bad, and thankfully.
Yeah. Within alt pop repeat, as we said before, you're talking about pop culture and counterculture, and then pop culture trends that emerge from that. What are some of the favorite topics that you've been able to cover on that show that maybe wouldn't be allowed in some other formats, or not allowed, but maybe a little bit more difficult to cover?
For sure. So there's multiple different countercultures. A counterculture is a movement. So you have alternative culture that is driven from mainstream pop culture, and then counterculture are movements like civil rights, LGBTQ community, cannabis is a huge counterculture movement. I think UFOs is a counterculture movement. Some people would disagree, but I think it's a movement. Drag is a movement. Psychedelics is even one, and that's still part, let's say, within the war on drugs, right? So there are movements to make change and to change the mainstream populace ideals, right? So we change the greater thinking and be more acceptive maybe of something that are different facts and maybe not accurate. So it sounds so bad, but some of my favorite ones are cannabis ones, to be honest. They're really, really great. And they're like deep dive within like the war on drugs, and then I see how all of these countercultures are almost connected to each other in some way, especially the civil rights movement, LGBTQ. Like, you'd be so surprised on how they overlap. And to be honest, it's not that I'm promoting cannabis, but and teach their own recreationally what they do, but cannabis is interesting because it's embedded in so much. And same with also hip hop culture. Hip hop is a counterculture too. And I've talked to DMC from Run DMC, is amazing human, like just a gem. And it's unbelievable how hip hop has influenced the mainstream populace. Not everybody knows that, but they really have. And the Black community has done something that's unbelievable for us in mainstream, and it's not always respected as much as it could because you get lots of cultural appropriation. So we see that too. There's lots of times where we're like throwing up the cultural appropriation flag, not to be some like crazy leftist or anything. It's literally just speaking the facts of what happened over time. So
Oh yeah, of course.
It's a fun history conversational show too, because I get to surprise like my best friend with facts, and we kind of like present it to each other, or we sync it up after our interview with our like expert or celebrity. So
And with all the projects you do, and as I ask this question, I'm going to sort of fiddle with audio in the background, so I'm going to probably meander somewhat with this question. But as with everything that you do, Chrissy, what is the project where your most authentic voice, your most true voice comes out? Where are we hearing the purest form of Chrissy Newton?
ooh, uh, depends on what side you want to hear from me. If you want to hear my ideals when it comes to culture and where we are today, and how, we look at countercultures and where they're reflected. But if you want to hear my UFO, conversations, a lot of people do that, and I would imagine on this side this would be something they would have. My authentic self of trying to get to the truth and core root, and I actually probably say that with both shows. The truth and core root is important to me, and it's, not trying to like virtue signal, but it is. I want to be able to have a show that interests people, but also gives them a form of understanding, and also answers questions for them and clarifies things. So for me, that's like really important. And truth is, and it's one of the main reasons I work with the debrief, because I feel that we do that very well. We try our best to fact check and do those things as much as possible. People get things wrong, and we're more than happy to say like we screwed up at times if we have, or we've have to re-report things. It happens occasionally, especially in the UFO space. But that's where my love is, and that's where my voice is probably truth, and at times for sure championing people and others.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, we kind of live in this divisive time. Not kind of. We live in a divisive time, and everything is politicized. And I certainly have my opinions about things, and very much a proponent of equal rights and protection for all groups of people, regardless of religion, orientation, any of that. So from your perspective, as someone that is both a public figure, but also a public relations pro, how does one navigate these very politicized waters, insofar as you might want to talk about or place your client to talk about a congressional UAP hearing? However, you also run up against a potential media outlet or interviewer that's taking on very extreme views. What's the balance between wanting to inform people versus not wanting to platform or contribute to the platform of some divisive figures?
It's a great question. I would say depending on the topic and who it is, but if you're looking at a client that, well, first of all, facts will always be facts. That's it. You're never going to get away from facts, right? And if you can prove them through evidence, then that's where you want to sit. Another one, never speak on something you don't know of. That's something we tell people in media all the time when I'm doing media coaching. Never go outside, never be accusatory, never blame, and don't let people inflame you. Like, I think a big part of it, like, and it's funny, we're having a conversation right now, but I would say the flow is pretty balanced back and forth. And so it's saying, like, who owns that? You are doing the interview. Don't let the interviewer own you. Be able to contribute, but able to go at your pace in the way that you want to answer questions, because that's how you're going to get stumbled, and that's what they want, right? If they want a reaction piece, they're going to throw multiple questions at you. And so we call that cherry picking and bridging. And you'll see, now that I say this, that if someone doesn't know, they'll see this with tons of politicians that happen. You'll get a journalist will send multiple questions. You answer one of those, and then you bridge to your positive, which is like a key message of something that you want in a campaign. So when it comes to like answering questions when somebody's riled up, you have to obviously keep your composure, but then think to like, what's the core value of the story that I want to tell here? And if you can't answer something, that's okay. Like when people say, like no comment, there's no such thing of that really, but there's ways to say like, I don't know, but what I can tell you is this, or if I don't, that's not my place. It's not my place of expertise. So I'm not going to answer it. So there's tons of way to get around that. But also, it just depends on what outlet you're with. You have to know your media outlet, you need to know your journalist, and you need to know your beat. And that's for any company, not just in a UFO topic or anything else. Everybody should, before they jump on an interview, should know who they're talking to, or at least watch some shows so they have an idea of who the person is and what kind of conversation they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, as important as it is for the interviewer to arrive prepared, it's equally important for the guest to arrive prepared, because if you don't know the style of questions or how they do things, yes, you not only potentially may, whiff at answering a certain question, you might let them own you a little bit. It can get a little bit tricky, dicey in that way.
Yeah, and it depends on your writer. If you have a writer that's generally very negative towards the UAP topic, be prepared to be not misquoted, but be prepared to be quoted in something that might not be in favor of you, right? But there are times when you might want to be quoted in something to help balance out an argument. That's the other thing too. You might not like this writer, but when you find out more, and you can ask more questions, you can say, what's your topic? Is this going to be a balanced or negative review? You can ask them that, or is it going to be positive? You can decide. You don't just have to say yes. You can ask more questions of what direction that writer is going in, or media member, and be able to even ask for advanced questions. Sometimes you don't get it, but most of the time you won't. But you can ask, like, what's the general overview you're looking for? Along with then, hey, we know that we're having a story that might be negative. It's like for example, Julian Barnes. Julian Barnes of the New York Times did a piece that was generally, I would say, more on the negative side for UFO community. Some people might consider it a balanced, depend on how you look at the UFO topic. But if you are, let's say, specifically in the UFO space, you would probably have taken that piece to be negative, because it wasn't talking about all the other things that were happening potentially off-world, or all the other evidence we have in history. He was just saying that it was all generally Chinese drones, or it could just be China or foreign adversaries. So a lot of people took that as a negative. But you'd be able to, if he decided to go to someone like a Jacques Vallée or like a Ryan Graves or somebody else, he might be able to get you at that point, be able to help change that perspective of that reader's opinion by having a really solid quote. So sometimes if it's negative press, it's not always bad to be quoted in it, because you can help change ideals. If the writer decides to run that too, that's the other part.
Well, yeah, because you are an interviewer as well. For me, I'm always, as much as I try to prepare for an interview, there's a required flexibility. You have to be able to adapt when something new is brought up. You need to listen and pivot. But then there's and similarly, there are interviews that I'm more excited for, some that I'm like, well, okay, I'm sure this will be fun, or either way, I'm going to do my job. I'm curious about the stories for you, the interviews where you were blown away or so pleasantly surprised because you got so much more out of it than what you really expected. Maybe it was someone that you liked, but then they started telling an anecdote that just opened up a whole new world as far as what you thought about them. Do you understand the kind of thing I'm leaning into here?
Yeah, I do. I've had interviews with Lou Elizondo. We had a really great interview about China and China having a UAP office. This was a little bit ago. And it was interesting because outside of just having a conversation about China and UFOs and what was happening there, we were also talking about like foreign politics and foreign policies and everything else. So it expanded the way that I view Lou and what he knows outside of the UFO topic, into understanding that he's having these other conversations, which I would assume, but most people would just want to have a UFO, but we were able to have that back and forth. Christopher Mellon, like there's so many of them. And even just having like a basic conversation with NASA. I talked to someone recently about regolith, and building a simulant, which is lunar soil on Earth, and that would just be like a replicant, right, of lunar soil and why we needed it. And it was interesting because like I collect like moon rocks and stuff like that, but I've never looked at it from the perspective of technology and why we would need so much of it. And it's like such a basic thing. Like it's literally dirt, right? We talked about dirt for an hour and a half, but in like a really interesting, educated way. And I didn't even know about like space farmers. I was like, what? I was like, I need to date a space farmer after talking to him. Like, legitimately, I tweeted it. I was like, if anybody knows where I can find a space farmer, not asking for a friend. I also grew up in like rural Ontario, so I was like, this is amazing. It's like, so just stuff like that, and didn't even think of the concept of space farming and what space farming would look like in the future, because the students that are, or people that he's working with now in the younger generation will legitimately be space farmers. It's not just going to be this fake kind of made up concept of, I shouldn't say made up, but like a on Earth version of it. They're actually going to be on the moon farming and doing agriculture. And I just think that's unbelievable. We're going to be really old when it happens, but like, you know, and having that basic kind of conversation open up my minds to thinking about, okay, this is what this is really, the world is going to look like when I'm probably 80, you know,
Yeah.
maybe older. Yeah.
I absolutely love those little moments though, where it just goes off
Yeah.
into a direction that you don't expect. I mean, I was speaking with Paul Hynek, actually,
Yep.
due to you helping arrange that interview. And sure, you know, you want to talk about the legacy of J. Allen Hynek, but then there was this moment where I was asking Paul about his father's, you know, pop culture interests, and he tells me that J. Allen Hynek was a big fan of Monty Python and the Muppets, and
I
that
know he's a Muppet fan.
and that is, and I was like, I had to ask. I'm like, well, tell me about the favorite skits or Muppets, and he proceeds to tell me that J. Allen Hynek, the father of ufology, was a fan of Waldorf and Statler, and liked the dead parrot skit from Monty Python. And suddenly we get this whole other perspective of this person that is an icon in this field.
Oh my God. No, I love Paul. Like, if anyone gets to meet him, he's a gem of a human. Along with, like, I would imagine his dad's like that. I'm a huge Muppet fan. I did not know that. I wish I asked him when I interviewed him, because I would have changed, like, that would have been sad, because it would have become a Muppet conversation for like a good 10 minutes. But that's amazing. I'm like, mine's about technologies and things like that. If it was pop culture, I'd be going down that road. But my audience would be like, Chrissy, why are you talking about Muppets?
Well,
Go on your social and do that. But they are legitly like, my Muppets are a big part of my life. I know that sounds funny.
well, what are your favorite? Who are your favorite Muppets then? Since we did open in this topic,
Depending on how, like, obviously everybody loves Kermit. That's a big one. That's like but my all love is Gonzo. I've always had him and his chickens, and I just think he's hilarious. Chef is like obviously one of my favorites too. Animal to a degree as well, but Rizzle the rat, that's another one. He's my favorite in the Christmas Muppets. That's like, it's like perfect. But yeah, I've always been. I should tell this story though. It's like a random Muppet story. There was a press conference in Toronto when they were really like relaunched all the movies, and Kermit came to town first, and I tried to get into the press junket. And this is me just doing PR, not media. And then I couldn't get in. Then the second time around, Miss Piggy came to town, and I was like, I'd rather Kermit, but whatever. A Muppet's a Muppet. And I've never seen a Muppet in real life, like actually move. So I tried everything. I called producers from larger morning shows. I was like, this is not, I do not, any publicist, I do not recommend doing this. But I was like, I need to get in. So for like a good day, I was calling just to get in. And then I got the contact to Disney, to the PR person. And I was like, please just let me into the press conference. I'll stay in the back. And she's like, I just can't. And I was heartbroken, because I just want to see a Muppet like move in real life and have a conversation with it. So
I have not done this, but I do know people who have conducted interviews with Muppets in those same projects that you're speaking of, when they rebooted the movies, and then even recently they had the Dr. Teeth, I guess, show that on Disney Plus. So I have not, but I certainly share your enthusiasm and passion about wanting to interview a Muppet in real life. So okay, so yeah, Kermit, that's a good one. And Gonzo. I mean, you picked one of each. There's what they say, the Chaos Muppet versus Order Muppets. Are you familiar with this?
oh no.
That it's a personality type, that basically we are either a Chaos Muppet or an Order Muppet. So you have Gonzo, Animal, Fozzie, those are Chaos Muppets, and then you have Kermit and Scooter, very much order Muppets, and that we tend to be in one category or the other of Muppet.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I would say for sure Kermit and then Gonzo. But I just love Gonzo. We also don't know where he comes from. He's just so abstract as a Muppet. Like I think he's funny and his little chickens run around, but he cares so much for them, and like he loves Piggy. Like there's just it's how can you not love a Muppet? And I every time I see a Muppet, I laugh. Like I just can't. I share Muppet memes all the time. I think I shared one about the worm, Slimy the worm, recently.
Yeah.
It was a Muppet history, and it was about what did it say? It said something about I love slime. Before Slimy was this large, puppet that has eyes. Now it was just a little singular. It was a little tube with little orange and yellow lines, and I love him. And I was like, I do too. I'm like, I can relate to this. And I shared it, and people are like, really, Chrissy? I'm like, you don't understand. If you don't love Muppets and have this love for them in your heart, then you just will never get it. You'll never get it.
I question the humanity of someone's heart if they're just not even into Muppets at all.
I agree. When I was in Los Angeles on the Columbia, like old Columbia studios, I was having a friend of mine works there, and I was meeting his boss, and he had a whole thing of like Muppet stuff. Like I love the Muppet Babies, and he had like Muppet Babies, and I just lost my mind. He had Fraggle Rock, huge fan of Fraggle Rock. Like I remember during COVID, the beginning of COVID, I bought all the DVDs, and I was like, you know what? If this is how it's going to start, I'm going to start it with Fraggle Rock.
Yeah.
And then I started to watch Fraggle Rock from the beginning throughout most of the pandemic of from DVD to DVD, because I was like, this is the best way to get through it. And then I started making montages with Muppets videos because I of like how I felt during COVID. It became a thing, and then I posted on my Instagram. So yeah, but if people don't know, go watch Fraggle Rock as an adult again, because like legitly it is the best writing. It has multiple worlds and universes that you get to explore in. Who gets to go to the trashy and they have an oracle. Like it's anyway, I could go on for days.
No, I love it. See,
Yeah.
I didn't expect to go down the Muppet path with this, but I love it. I'm happy that we did. For just for you, what are your dream, your wish list interviews that you would like to conduct? I mean, especially since you're across 2.5 podcasts, sometimes 3 podcasts, somewhere in the skies. I know you pop in. What's your dream interview?
Oh, geez. On the UFO side of things, I would love to interview Susan Goff, which is like, people are like, who's that? She's the spokesperson for the Pentagon, because she literally is in my space, obviously in a very different government official way. But I would like to have a really dynamic conversation with her about how the politics work within communications and talking to the masses. People are like, that's kind of dry, but that's what I would love. Sean Kirkpatrick, like any of the tops. I'm still kind of leaning towards that way. In AI, I'm just forgetting his name now, that owns ChatGPT. Oh my gosh, what is his name? The CEO of it. Oh, I know. It's gonna kill me now. Maybe I don't want to interview him as much. But he would be one. I have a huge fascination for AI. So I'd love that. Anything that's really futuristic and at the top of, as much as people love and hate Elon Musk, I would love to sit in a room with him and just pick his brain, see how he works, see how he operates, spend time with him. That would be something that I love to do. And to be honest, I would love, as much as I love my podcast, I would love to do like those Rolling Stone moments. And I think a lot of us would, where you get to follow that person for a long period of time. I was lucky enough to kind of do that with Lou Elizondo for a little bit in LA. I was spending time with him, a couple days. I was learning more. He was doing some stuff with BBC that I joined along with him. And, and it was interesting, and I was laughing because I was asking him questions and I was getting to know him. And I was like, oh, it's like a very much of a Rolling Stone moment. And I was like, I wish I had a camera here or something just to document the moments, because it's so real and it's so authentic. And that's what I would really love to do, is take just outside and bring that intimacy into like a real camera form one day.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like those opportunities are as available. I guess you still do it with some of the outlets, but not as widely available. It doesn't seem like when we're in an era of 15-minute interview segments, you know?
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because I think people want it. People love that close quarters conversation. They want them. I've been championing the idea of doing a 60 minutes for the UAP topic for the longest period of time because I think we need it. I think that there's like sitting down and asking really difficult questions and having really hard conversations about this topic with scientists or doing roundtables that are really, really educational, but also really filled with like hard questions to answer. I think that's what people want. And they're looking for that type of content. That's why they go online. Executives are so slow to the get right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because we have this unlimited space, the unlimited ability to do long interviews, in-depth interviews, kind of what we were saying earlier, but it's still always prepackaged into very small segments. And it's unless you're able to produce your own documentary and distribute it, it seems like, or live streams or podcasts, it seems it's increasingly difficult to get that in-depth conversation going on.
Yeah, and people make really great content these days independently. Like some of it's unbelievably made, but it's so much work. Like
Yeah.
people just don't know how much work it is until you actually go and do it.
Yeah. Well, I know people will be able to see you at Contact in the Desert, and that's happening June 2nd to 4th, right around the corner. And that is in Indian Wells, California, I believe. What are some of the topics you will be discussing there? Or are you going to be presenting? Are you going to be moderating? What are you doing?
I'm just opening for a couple of people and doing introductions for some people, but I am doing my own 90-minute panel or interview, 90-minute lecture where I'm talking about government and media from a PR perspective. But what I've kind of done in my presentation is done some original interviews with like Christopher Mellon, Tim McMillan, and Brian Bender to talk about the media landscape and like journalism, and along with then the concept of like fake news, what's misinformation. So I really start off my presentation with breaking down not just looking at Kenneth Arnold, right? The first real major pop culture UFO sighting that went mainstream and went into Life magazine. But outside of looking at it, we really deconstructed and how it ended up working and why did it go mainstream and like who started it and who really championed the UFO topic in the beginning was local newspapers. They were the local reporter. It was like local Doug, at like the Plattsville, Gazette that was writing about UFOs and experiences and it getting syndicated. So talking about that, trying to clear up misunderstandings around it, but then also looking at the outlets, looking at like Life magazine, looking at like pulp magazines. Pulp magazines were one of the first, which I think is really cool. The concept of what a UFO looks like, a flying saucer, really came from pop culture and pulp magazines. So I break that down and explain what they were way before Kenneth Arnold. And then we have Kenneth Arnold, and then I get into more of Life magazine. And then I break down the New York Times. And some stuff that I found was super interesting was Donald Kehoe, who was like a pilot and also working within government, but also loved UFOs, as most people know if they follow this, and was one of the first people to champion in this side, outside of Jacques Vallée and everyone else. So I found one of the first news clippings ever from the New York Times, and it was about how he ended up getting cut off through the Armstrong Circle, theater circle, which was a program that ended up cutting him off and censoring him. So it's really interesting because I showed the New York Times in the past and how they've covered this and how it's been very balanced and also generally positive to where we are today and how they haven't really changed their beat. And then I talked to Christopher Mellon and we break down exactly how he talks about how he ceded the piece to the media and how that worked.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun. And then we get into like Brian Bender talks about fake news. We talk about misinformation with Tim McMillan, and then I get into the works of government and how government works with media and public affairs. So if you're interested in like the origins of media and how it works with government and how the masses are communicated, 100% please come out because I'd love to see you.
Yeah, it sounds like a great event, and it sounds like a great talk too, an exceptional talk. So yeah, I definitely want to. Hopefully, we'll get a chance for me to see that in the future. I unfortunately won't be at Contact in the Desert, but I'm very stoked about that particular talk. So If we're at a place where you're doing it again, I will be right there.
Oh my God.
So in the meanwhile, how can people otherwise support you and just keep up with everything you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So we can see where it says Chrissy Newton. That's my Twitter. And then Being Chrissy Newton is my Instagram. So most of the time when it comes to UFOs and these types of topics, that's my Twitter. That's my page. I was going to laugh because I was going to put, when you do the social media of like what your Twitter looks like, mine's like really weird. So my Twitter would be like me in the UFO shirt. My Instagram would be a mix of like many things and selfies as well. Let's be honest, I'm a woman. And then a mixed with like my Facebook being like, more family orientated. So yeah, but you can find me mainly, you can chat with me on Twitter because I'm very active there. So
All right, great.
yeah.
Well, again, my guest has been Chrissy Newton. You can catch her at Contact in the Desert, June 2nd to 4th, at Indian Wells, California. You can also listen to her as the host of Rebelliously Curious on the Debrief YouTube channel and co-host of Alt Pop Repeat podcast and occasional co-host on Somewhere in the Skies. And as she said, across social media on at Chrissy Newton and then Being Chrissy Newton. Two very different, same Chrissy Newton, but two different sides of Chrissy Newton.
Apparently so.
Chrissy, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Aaron. Good to see you.
Great seeing you. And this has been Talking Strange. If you have stories you'd like to share, the strange and unusual, email us at talkingstrange@denimgeek.com. I'm Aaron Sagers, and until next time, be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.